You can see how that could get really confusing because those numbers are quite different. Which one is actually the best one for tomatoes? What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having an awesome day. It is Friday, May 2nd here in South Georgia. And on today's video, I'm going to tell you why you don't need a shelf full of a bunch of different fertilizers for your backyard garden and why you really only need 2. So as I'm sure we all have, if you go to a local garden center and go to the fertilizer section, it is easy to get quickly overwhelmed. There's so many different brands, so many different products, specific fertilizer blends for specific vegetables, and how do you know which is the right one for your garden? Also, if you go online and Google how to fertilize blank, you're going to get overwhelmed with all this information, all these different plans and different formulations you should be using on specific vegetables. So instead of trying to digest all that information and dealing with that overwhelming number of choices, today we're going to keep it simple and I'm going to tell you why you just need 2. And before we get into those 2, let me mention we're not talking about specific brands today, although I will show some examples of stuff I have around here. We're not talking about a specific brand of fertilizer, more types of fertilizer that you need. So we're going to be talking about those 2 types, not brands. So number 1 on the list, the type of fertilizer that everybody that has a backyard garden is going to need is something balanced or relatively balanced. And what we mean by balanced, we'll use this AgriThrive jug as an example. You can see the analysis on this is 3, 3, 5. So we want those 3 numbers there, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the potassium. We want those 3 numbers to be relatively close. Now, how far apart do those numbers have to be before it's no longer considered balanced? I'll let you be the judge of that. But in my opinion, 3, 3, 5 is still relatively balanced. Yes, those numbers aren't equal, but they're close enough. So the balanced fertilizer is something you're going to use on everything in the beginning. You're going to put it down when you plant or before you plant and help give those plants a good head start. Now the way I do it, and if you've seen a lot of our videos, you already know this, I put a granular fertilizer. I use this Coop Grow, which is a 334. I put this in the furrow before I plant. Now my raised beds, it's a little different. I may sprinkle it over the entire bed there before I plant. Sometimes immediately before I plant, sometimes a week or so before I plant in the raised beds. But if you don't have any granular fertilizer on hand, you can also do this with a liquid fertilizer. We call that a soil drench. So you mix some of this up with water, make you a solution in a 5-gallon bucket, take your little pitcher and pour it along the row there that you're going to be planting. Now, like I said earlier, I usually just put it in the furrow where my row is going to go. But some gardeners will spread that balanced fertilizer over the entire plot. Depends on what kind of equipment you have, your scale, and what your budget is. I could see where in some situations it might be valuable to have that nutrition evenly distributed over the entire plot. So we talked about the AgriThrive and the Coop Grow, which are both organic balanced fertilizers that we use, but some other options out there. You'll find quite a few different brands of fish emulsion out there. You'll also find some corn steep liquor out there. AgriThrive actually has both of those. And you'll see seaweed fertilizer, kelp fertilizer, a lot of different liquid organic balanced fertilizers out there. So as far as synthetic options go, you've got your 10-10-10, which is what we have here, the Super Rainbow Blend. This is a granular fertilizer, as you see right there. A lot of people have been using this for years and years, decades and decades in their gardens. This is probably the most affordable option out there if you don't care about being organic. I've had this bag for several years. I don't know what this stuff costs now, but I think I paid around $17 or $20 for this big bag here. So if you can find a farm supply store, they usually have this stuff here for pretty cheap. Another synthetic option you'll find out there is the old blue stuff, the 20-20-20 here. Same thing as the Miracle Grow you'll see in smaller containers at your big box store. Now, unlike the 10-10-10, which is pretty affordable, this stuff right here has gotten pretty pricey. I hadn't bought any in several years. I bought this a week or two ago. Have a couple of my own personal fig trees in the greenhouse that were in a little bit of a funk. I'm trying to get them out of it, so see if I can do it with this stuff here. So I think I paid around 60 or 70 bucks for this 25-pound bag here. Now, you are getting twice the amount of nutrients here as you do with the 10-10-10, and this stuff tends to work a lot faster because it's water soluble. So just like there's different ways we would put down that Coop Grow versus the AgriThrive if we were going the organic route, going the synthetic route, you can just sprinkle that 10-10-10 in your planting furrow, or if you're just going to use the blue stuff, then you dissolve it in a bucket of water and you could pour it along the row there. Just be careful with that stuff a little bit. You can burn those young tender plants. So your balanced or relatively balanced fertilizer, you're going to use it on everything in the beginning. And let me walk through a couple different groups of vegetables here to give you an idea of how you're going to use this stuff. So for your legumes, your beans and peas, you really only need to put it down at planting, and then those are usually good for the duration. So put some down at planting and then just let them grow and do their thing. For your fruiting vegetables, things like tomatoes, peppers, squash, cucumbers, melons, pumpkins, you're going to put it down at planting, and then you want to give them some more every 2 or 3 weeks as they grow. We call that spoon feeding, just giving them a little bit every 2 to 3 weeks. And then for root veggies, things like carrots, beets, parsnips, and I'll throw taters in there, although taters usually aren't considered a root veggie. For those 4, put it down at planting and then give it to them 1 to 2 more times throughout their life cycle. So for all those things I just mentioned, that balanced or relatively balanced fertilizer is all you need. Now, how often you apply it is going to vary a little bit from one vegetable to the next, but hopefully that simple plan there will help you out. Now, the second fertilizer you're going to need is a straight nitrogen fertilizer, because some things we grow what we call heavy feeders and they need extra nitrogen. Now, as I told you on that last video, if we give tomatoes and some of these fruiting vegetables too much nitrogen, we're going to grow a lot more foliage than we do fruit. So that's why we give them the balance. But some things need that extra nitrogen. And I won't go through an exhaustive list of things that need extra nitrogen, but just some basic examples here: corn, onions, and then some brassicas, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, things like that. And we're going to use this straight nitrogen fertilizer a little differently. We put that balance down at planting on everything. Remember, the straight nitrogen, we're not going to give that to the plants until they start growing a little bit. Now, some examples of straight nitrogen fertilizers you could use. I'll show you the one I use first, this Nature Safe 1300 here, which has some blood meal, feather meal, meat meal in it. Also has a little bit of ammoniacal nitrogen or ammonia-based nitrogen that kind of hits those plants real quick. So this is an organic option. Other organic options would be basically the components of this fertilizer by themselves. So you could use feather meal by itself. You could use blood meal by itself. Now, I don't have any synthetic straight nitrogen fertilizers here to show you, but some options you'll find out there. If you go to your local farm supply store, you'll find urea, you'll find ammonium sulfate, you'll find calcium nitrate, you'll find sodium nitrate, several different ones out there. You'll know it's a straight nitrogen fertilizer because that first number will be big and those other numbers will be 0. Now, most of your straight nitrogen fertilizers, organic or synthetic, are going to be granular, and so they're applied by side dressing or just sprinkling it around the plants. There are a few water-soluble options out there. I think there's a water-soluble version of calcium nitrate that you can use, but most of them are going to be granular. You're going to side dress or sprinkle around the plants. And to give you an idea of how often you would do this, let's go through a couple of examples. Remember, we're putting down that balanced at planting. Now we're talking about, for these heavy feeders, how often we're going to give them some of that straight nitrogen. So corn, for example, usually give it 1 or 2 rounds of straight nitrogen throughout its life cycle. Usually once when it gets about, I don't know, knee high, and then we keep a close eye on it. We may give it 1 more round. If it looks nice and dark green, we may let it ride. Onions, I usually give them 2 to 3 rounds of straight nitrogen while they're in that vegetative phase. How much or how many rounds I give them has a lot to do with my soil in that particular plot. If it's a plot that has had my chickens grazing on it recently, I can probably get by with just 2 rounds of nitrogen. If it hasn't had the chickens on there for a while, I might need to add 3. So it will vary a little bit depending on soil conditions, but that gives you kind of a good baseline. The next one would be Brussels sprouts. These tend to be pretty heavy feeders. I have found the secret to getting some good consistent Brussels sprout production down here is giving them some straight nitrogen. So we'll usually give them 1 to 2 rounds as they grow. And then you've got cabbage and other greens, things like collards or kale. We'll kind of group all those together, the cabbage and the greens. Those like a decent amount of nitrogen, and you probably want to give those 1 to 2 rounds as they grow. Now I will caution you a little bit on this with the greens. While I do tend to give my cabbage 1 to 2 rounds of nitrogen, I don't add as much to the greens. I have found that if you give too much nitrogen to greens, they end up being like those greens at the grocery store, and they make your belly rumble a little bit if you eat a lot of them. So I do give my greens a little bit of nitrogen, but I don't go real heavy with it because I love to eat them things, but I don't want to pay for it. So those are the basic 2 you need, a balanced fertilizer and a nitrogen fertilizer. If you've got those 2, you can pretty much cover 95% of your bases in the vegetable garden. I know we didn't cover every single vegetable out there, and some do have specific needs, but if you have those 2, you can pretty much do all you need to do to grow some good groceries. Now, like I said earlier, if you go online or go to a big garden center, you're going to see tons of options out there. I wrote down a few. I just Googled tomato fertilizer. There was a 462 tomato fertilizer, a 41838 tomato fertilizer, a 573, a 443, and a 1210.5. You can see how that could get really confusing because those numbers are quite different. Which one is actually the best one for tomatoes? And a lot of that's just marketing. I know a lot of these companies will take a fertilizer that's produced in bulk, relabel it, put it in a smaller container, and just call it a tomato fertilizer. But the point of this video is to encourage you to not get distracted by all that labeling and glitz and glamour at the garden center. Keep it simple. Find you a nice balanced fertilizer, relatively balanced fertilizer that you like to use, that is in your budget, and stick with it. And I promise you that will work for you. You don't need all these special formulations. That's not to say some of these special formulations don't work. I know there are special fertilizers for carrots. I've used one in the past and it worked pretty well, but I don't know that it worked that much better than the balance to justify having another fertilizer on the shelf. So keep it simple, don't overcomplicate things, and make sure whatever go-to balanced fertilizer you're going to use is something you can easily keep on hand. The worst thing is having plants ready or having your ground ready to plant on a Saturday or late in the afternoon and you're out of fertilizer. And yeah, you can always put it down after the fact, but it's good to get in that practice of putting it down before you plant. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and let me know in the comments below what your go-to fertilizers are. Do you agree with me that you should keep it simple and just roll with 2, or are you a fan of having all these different kind of formulations? And if you want to specifically see how we fertilize our tomato plants, watch this video right here from last year. We'll show you how we mix it up and pour it alongside those plants to keep them nice and happy throughout their life cycle. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.